Hi everyone, thanks for being here today at my talk. So today I would like to talk about some aspects of the clausal structure and the grammatical relations in Nalögo. Nalögo is a Reef Santa Cruz Oceanic language which is spoken on Santa Cruz Island in Temotu province in Solomon Islands. So Nalögo is spoken in the southwest of Santa Cruz, right here, while Natungu is spoken in the north and Nangu or Ndewu is spoken in the southeast. There is also a fourth language, Noipe, spoken closer to the Nalögo area, but the language is not indicated here in the map. These four languages and Aiwoo, spoken in the Reef Islands, form the Reef Santa Cruz subgroup. That together with the 6 languages of Utupua and Vanikoro form the Temotu group, which has been classified in 2007 as a primary subgroup within the Oceanic family. There are also 3 Polynesian outliers in the area. So we have Kautaumaku, which is spoken up north in the Duff Islands, and the Tikopia and Danuta, which are spoken further east. There are 5 varieties of Nalögo, and the data on which this stock is based were collected in the 2 villages of Neanemboi in the southwest here. And there are approximately 1,620 speakers of the language. So now I'm going to give the basics of the clausal structure and the alignment of the pronominal bound forms, because this is useful for what we are going to say later. So Nalögo is a fairly typical Oceanic language because it has a transitivity-based system with 3 main clause types. So we have intransitive, transitive, and semitransitive clauses. Intransitive clauses display an SV word order. This is the basic one, as shown in example 1. So the old man died. It's also possible with nominal arguments to have the opposite word order, VS, as in example 2, but this is rare, at least in my data. Transitive clauses display 2 core arguments, A, the most actor-like, and O, the less actor-like argument. With nominal agents, the basic word order is VAO, as shown in example 3, where we have Meleke took the girl's hand, and Meleke, the transitive agent, follows the verb, which is sentence initial. Some verbs can be marked in transitive clauses by the transitivizer, applicativizer T, but this of course depends on the verb class to which the verb belongs. There is also a type of semitransitive clause which is syntactically transitive, so with 2 core arguments, A and O, but morphologically intransitive. So for instance, the person marking pattern is intransitive. This type of clause is typically used to express a focus on the action, and this can correlate with some aspectual meanings, so for instance, habituality, and with objects that are low in individuation. So for instance, they are generic, non specific, plural, etc. So semitransitive clauses have a basic word order in Nalögo, which is AVO, as shown in example 4 here, where we have the girl is peeling potatoes with a small knife. The girl, iko, which is in preverbal position. Then we have the verb, that in this case is marked by the prefix v, but this depends on the verb class to which the verb belongs. And then we have the semitransitive object, butete, in this case plural. Only subjects in Nalögo are marked on the verb, while objects are typically expressed by 3 pronouns. And the subjects, as shown in this table, are enclitics. So here I've reported the basic forms of set 1, one of the 2 sets of subject-bound forms in the language. Pronouns follow a minimal-augmented pattern, which means that there are 4 basic person types, person categories, in the minimal paradigm. So we have the first person, the first plus second person, so you and I together, and then we have the second and third person. And these 4 basic person categories are then pluralized in the augmented paradigm. And this system appears to be rare in Oceanic languages, at least as far as I know. Subject enclitics can co-occur with portmanteau subject prefixes, expressing also aspect and mood. So there is a number distinction, as we can see in the table, between non-third augmented forms and third augmented forms. Plus there is a further distinction between irrealis and realis. But while the irrealis is expressed by specific prefixes with different forms depending on the number, as shown here in the table, the realis shows an opposition, an aspectual one, between perfective and imperfective. And we can see here in the table that there are different forms as well, depending on the number. In terms of alignment, all the person categories which are not the third one follow a subject pattern, which means that S, the transitive agent, and the semitransitive agent are marked in the same way and differently from O, which is unmarked on verbs, as I've said before. So in terms of alignment, the third person shows a different pattern, which is called a tripartite, which means that the S argument and the semitransitive agent are marked in the same way and differently from the transitive agent and the transitive object. So for instance, here with the third person, minimal, we can see that the transitive agent is marked by the enclitic le, while the S argument and the semitransitive agent are zero marked on the verb. Likewise, with the third person augmented, we have the transitive agent, which is marked by the enclitic k, and the S argument and the semitransitive agent, which are expressed by the portmanteau subject prefixes only. So here we have 3 examples showing the alignment with the third minimal subject bound form to show that it's tripartite. So in 5a and 5b we have an intransitive clause, she's swimming, and a semitransitive clause, she's baking big pigs, where we can see that the third minimal subject here and here is zero marked on the verb of both clauses, and 5a and 5b are different from 5c, the transitive clause, she's wrapping those taros, where the third minimal subject here is marked on the verb by the enclitic le. So what is the goal of this talk? While the alignment of the subject-bound forms tends to follow a subject pattern, at least all the person categories except for the third one, there are other constructions which appear to select different grammatical relations. So in this talk I focus on the existence of 2 verb phrases, selecting the transitive agent and the semitransitive object in transitive and semitransitive clauses respectively. And this is linked to the syntactic privilege status of the other 2 arguments occurring in those clauses, so the transitive object and the semitransitive agent respectively. This is interesting because in some respects the NALOGO clausal structure shows some structural similarities with the one attested in Aiwoo, the other recent cruise language spoken in the Reef Islands, which is analyzed as a symmetrical voice language. So the first diagnostics which can be used to identify the existence of a verb phrase where the agent forms a unit with the verb in transitive clauses is word order. So we have an example here in 6. We have seen this before. Meleke took the girl's hand, where the agent follows the verb, which is a sentence initial. But the agent in post-verbal position can be dislocated in pre-verbal position, as in 7, where we have, as for my sister, she cut the paper. When this happens, the agent needs to be cross-referenced on the verb by an enclitic, and in this case, in the case of 7, it's the enclitic le, the third minimal subject. So in a way, in terms of person marking pattern, we can say that the agent forms a unit with the verb, because when it changes its original position, this needs to be marked on the verb. Further evidence is given by the behavior of the transitive object, which cannot intervene between the verb and the transitive agent. We have an example here in 8, Iviki butete ko ombuengunge ko. So this sentence can only be interpreted as the potato chopped the boy, and not the boy chopped the potato. And the reason is because the position right after the verb is assigned to the agent. So butete ko, the potato, can only be interpreted as such. However, it's possible for the transitive object to intervene between the agent and the verb, as in example 9. But when this happens, the agent needs to be marked on the verb in the original position. So in 9, for instance, we have he kills him, the dog. So here we have the verb, and this one is the object following the verb, the free pronoun ninde. And then we have the nominal argument here, which is the agent. But as we can see, the agent is marked on the verb by the enclitic le. And the nominal agent here in a final position is analyzed in a positional function to the subject enclitic here. Unlike the agent in transitive clauses, the transitive object is free syntactically, in the sense that it can occupy the post-verbal position, as in example 10, with the basic word order VAO, or the pre-verbal position, as in example 11, freely. And objects are very often dislocated due to pragmatic reasons in general in the discourse. The second diagnostics, which can be used to identify the existence of a transitive VP of the type V transitive agent in transitive clauses, is the position of the third minimal object enclitic. So earlier I've said that objects are typically unmarked in NALOGO, and this is true, but there are two exceptions: action nominalizations based on transitive verbs, and applicative constructions, which are based on transitive verbs and are marked by the applicative ng. So here in 12 we have an example of an applicative construction marked by ng. We don't really need to know the properties of this construction, but we just have to focus on the position of the enclitic le, expressing the base object in this clause. So this is a subordinate temporal clause, Mweliko tuvelalung mangale. So when the honey-eater bird hears it, or more literally, the time in which the honey-eater hears it, so this is the translation. Here we have a transitive verb velal, to which the applicative marker ng attaches, making the construction trivalent. So we have three core arguments here. So we have the applied object, which is in pre-verbal position, mweliko, expressing a temporal role. Then we have the nominal agent, which follows the verb manga. And then we have the base object, which is marked by the third minimal object enclitic le. And as we can see, le attaches directly to the nominal agent, which forms a unit with the verb because it occurs inside the structure. There is also some evidence for the existence of VP in the semitransitive clause, where the verb forms a unit with the semitransitive object. But this is shown only by word order restrictions. So we have an example here in 13 of a basic semitransitive clause with AVO word order. So we have meko, the man, venim bupo, killed pigs. The agent in 13 can be dislocated in filant position, as in 14, he killed pigs, the man. So we can see that the agent in semitransitive clauses can be dislocated freely without any further change in the clause, in the person marking pattern, or anything else. But this is different from the semitransitive object, which is only found in a post-verbal position, and as in example 13, 14, And if we try to dislocate it in pre-verbal position, as in 15, the sentence is ungrammatical in the language. It's possible for some grammatical items to occur between the verb and the semitransitive objects. And this is the case of prepositional phrases, adverbs, or temporal expressions. So, for instance, in 16, we have we always collect shells, where we have the adverb have, which occurs between the verb and the semitransitive object. But the same position cannot be occupied by the agent of the semitransitive clause. So a sentence like 17 with me ko between the verb and the semitransitive object pig is ungrammatical. So now to sum up, I have mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the basic word order in intransitive clauses is SV, with the S argument that is pre-verbal. But with nominal arguments, the S can also occur post-verbally, even though this word order is rare in my data. In semitransitive clauses, the basic word order is AVO, with a semitransitive agent that is pre-verbal. However, it's possible for this argument to occur post-verbally, after the semitransitive object. In transitive clauses, the basic word order is VAO, with the transitive object occurring in post-verbal position after the transitive agent. However, for pragmatic reasons, the object can be dislocated in pre-verbal position. So in a way, we can say that the S argument, a semitransitive agent, and the transitive object are preferred arguments in terms of word order, because they can move freely in the clause in different positions, and this is different from the other two arguments of semitransitive and transitive clauses. So the semitransitive object, which has a fixed position right after the verb, and the transitive agent as well, which can be dislocated in a pre-verbal position like the transitive object, but when this happens, it needs to be marked on the verb by an enclitic. So in transitive and semitransitive clauses, we can say that the transitive object and the semitransitive agent are preferred arguments in a way in terms of word order. So the properties of the clausal structure and the grammatical relations in NALOGO that we have discussed so far shows some similarities with the system in Aiwoo, the recent clausal language spoken in the Reef Islands. So Aiwoo displays a symmetrical voice system with three voices. So we have the undergore, actor voice, and the circumstantial voice. The voice selected argument is analyzed by Ness in 2015 as the most pragmatically prominent argument in the clause, where the notion of prominence has to be understood, as the author writes, as relating to how the speaker structures a stretch of discourse, in terms of which elements are marked as worthy of attention. So in the actor voice, the most prominent argument is the actor, while in the undergore voice, the most prominent argument is the undergore, of course. And this definition is different from those that are typically found in symmetrical voice languages, where the voice selected argument is the pivot. So in this case, it's different because Aiwoo has no pivot restrictions, and this is also the case in NALOGO. So here we have two examples of the undergore voice and the actor voice in Aiwoo. So here in 18a, we have the actor voice with the basic word order, which is AVO, with the actor that is in pre-verbal position here. While in 18b, we have the undergore voice with the undergore that is in pre-verbal position, and the word order is OVA. So both the actor voice and the undergore voice are equally transitive, so display two core arguments, and are analyzed as equally morphologically marked. So in terms of actors, the actors in the actor voice are expressed by prefixes. For instance, in 18a here, we have the prefix li, which cross-references the actor in a preverbal position. And this is different from the underscore voice here in 18b, where the actors are expressed by suffixes, and in this case by the suffix e, expressing the third augmented person. There is no segmental voice morphology in Aiwoo, strictly speaking, but there are verb roots showing alternating verb forms depending on the voice in which the verb occurs. So for instance, here we have the verb epav, the verb root epav, for the verb cook, which occurs as epavi in the underscore voice and as epave in the actor voice. So the underscore voice displays a verb phrase where the actor forms a syntactic unit with the verb. And in this respect, the underscore voice appears to be similar to the transitive clause in NALOGO. However, the diagnostics which are used to identify the presence of a VP in the underscore voice are different from those attested in NALOGO. So in the case of Aiwoo, for instance, we have the distribution of the markers of negation and tense aspect mood and the floated quantifier. So here I show an example with negation. So NALOGO has a bipartite negation with two negators, the preverbal ba and the enclitic ngu. So basically in the underscore voice, while the actor occurs inside the structure, so between the two negators, the underscore argument occurs outside it. And we have an example here in 19a. So this is an underscore voice, no one saw him, where him is not overtly expressed. So here we have the first negator ba, then we have the verb, which is followed by the agent, the actor, and we can see that the actor is inside the structure between the two negators. And this is different from 19b. I didn't see anyone. So in this case, the underscore is expressed. It is in preverbal position zime. And we can see that zime is outside the structure. So here we have the negator, the first negator. Here we have the verb with the actor inside it. And then we have the second negator. So in this last slide, I would like to sum up the basic properties of the systems that we have discussed in NALOGO and Aiwoo to compare the two systems and see if there are some similarities. So in terms of number of core arguments, the transitive and the semitransitive clause in NALOGO display two arguments. Likewise in Aiwoo, we have the underscore voice and the actor voice, which are analyzed as equally transitive. In terms of verb marking, NALOGO has a transitivity-based system, so with valency changing devices depending on the verb that occurs in these constructions. And this is different from Aiwoo, which has verb roots with alternating verb forms depending on the voice in which the verb occurs. In terms of person marking pattern, the third person in NALOGO has a tripartite system where the agent of the transitive clause is marked differently from the agent of the semitransitive clause. And this is similar to Aiwoo because in Aiwoo there are different strategies to encode the actors in the underscore voice, where the actors are suffixes, and in the actor voice, where the actors are prefixes. In terms of verb phrase, in NALOGO there are two verb phrases in the transitive and the semitransitive clause with different properties, while in Aiwoo we find only one verb phrase in the underscore where the actor forms a unit with the verb. But the structure of this verb phrase is very similar to the one found in the transitive clause in NALOGO. Finally, in terms of word order, the transitive object and the semitransitive agent in NALOGO are analyzed as preferred arguments because they can move freely in different positions in the clause. In Aiwoo, instead, we have the undergo argument in the undergo voice and the actor argument in the actor voice, which are preferred arguments in the sense that they occur in the position of the voice selected argument, which is the preverbal one. So it's clear that the languages show some structural similarities, even though the systems are different in nature. Thank you very much for being here and listening to my talk.